franchise. Cage of Eden is a survival action-adventure manga with subgenres like ecchi and sci-fi. This was a series I followed for a number of years as it was being released on paperback in the United States. I really wanted to talk about this story because it had many great things going on for it, but ultimately what holds the series back from being a true hidden gem are too blatant not to criticize. Depending on your taste, its use of ecchi and fan service is anywhere from enjoyable, quote-unquote, to downright annoying. Its dependence on a lot of plot devices can also be overlooked if you can suspend your disbelief. This is a shonen manga with middle school age kids as the main protagonist. Having to suspend your disbelief to the best of your ability comes with the territory. But the one major flaw that almost ruined the manga for me is the failure of the author to give the story a coherent ending. As I was reading this manga, I really felt this was a greatly underappreciated story. Everything from the characters, setting, art, and mystery was executed well. I really wanted this to be one of my favorites, a hidden gem I could recommend to people without a doubt, and I still really do like this manga a great deal. In fact, it's one of the 10 completed series I have on my shelves right now, but it still doesn't compare to the all-time greatest in the anime and manga genre, and the things that it is held back by are obvious. And what I mean by that is that the foundation is rock solid. If this manga could get a do-over, I dare say an anime adaptation, things like the ending could be rewritten, given more time to develop, and wrinkles ironed out. The amount of fan service and repetitive storylines could be edited out to keep the pacing from slowing down, to cut the fat just enough so that the creators have time to wrap up the story in a satisfying way. Knowing that an anime will never happen for Cage of Eden, my last hope is knowing out there in the multiverse there is an alternate timeline where the story was executed perfectly, and I can almost envision that reality sitting here right now. A class of middle school students on their return trip from a vacation in Guam are on an airplane that mysteriously crash lands into an unknown island in the Pacific Ocean. The occupants of the plane are the school students, teachers, flight staff, and other civilian passengers. Miraculously, the plane, and I quote, succeeded in making an emergency landing, and no one was killed in the crash. But passengers panic immediately after and scatter into the uncharted jungle after a murder is committed on board of the airplane. The main character, Akira, wakes up after the crash, somehow alone in the jungle, separated from everyone else. Soon after, he finds strange, supposedly extinct animals and a few more survivors and regroups at the abandoned crash site. It is estimated that 300 people have scattered into the lawless island, just like beasts that have been set free from their cages. Akira and his growing number of companions have to survive, fend off giant prehistoric beasts, deal with rival groups of survivors, and solve the mysteries of the island. Continuous animal attacks, poisonous berries, murderers, altitude sickness, etc. are all things the group of middle school kids learn to adapt and survive from. Most of the story arcs and chapters deal with encounters with different survivors or groups of survivors, and one of the first major groups that Akira and the crew run into is a group of adults being led by a 10-year-old daughter of a leader of a corporate conglomerate. The adults are going along with whatever the girl wants and hope for a reward upon returning home, but the uneasy cooperation between the two groups falls apart after discovery of a murdered head flight attendant. After almost being executed by the adults, there's an animal attack, and the kids escape with the 10-year-old joining their team. The storyline is intriguing because the way the author explores how fast even highly civilized Japanese businessmen can turn into savages when fear takes hold. The head flight attendant was the only woman in the fairly large group of adults, and this chapter shows how fast lust and violence can escalate when a large group of humans becomes hysterical. This lays the themes out right in the early part of the manga as a strong hook. One of the better storylines in the series is the best friend turned evil. A quarter way through the series, Akira reunites with his best friend, but after being revealed as the same person who murdered the pilot, he goes off the deep end. And at the end of the story arc, he realizes what he's done and there's no way he can go back to being his normal self. He opts for floodwaters to take him and die a hero's death. As we are introduced to the characters, they mostly fit into a utilitarian niche. The computer nerd with a working rechargeable laptop was the first classmate that Akira finds in the jungle and becomes his second in command and trusted advisor. His smarts and laptop that serves as an encyclopedia that helps the groups survive by identifying animals and survival methods. A female martial artist is one of the best fighters, and so on. Early on, this is a core conflict for Akira because he sees himself as a useless person, doesn't really have any skills or any special traits that would be helpful in the situation. Akira himself, like most Japanese middle school students, is an everyman. He doesn't have any particular skills or characteristics in the beginning, but as far as the everyman archetype goes, he's still one of my favorites. But this plays well into the setting and the themes of the manga. The island changes the people that it inhabit. Akira is typically a secondary member of his friend group back home. On the island, he repeatedly risks his life to save those around him. He saves people when he can and never lets fear take over his actions. Many character deaths early on are due to hysterical fits and fear and hasty decision-making. The island forces everyone on the island to adapt or die, and how the people react to after they are let loose out of their cages determines if they are good or evil and fit to survive. Akira's transformation in this story starts as a regular school kid, to fearless leader of all his surviving classmates, is started because his heroic tendency to jump into the action and take responsibility. Over time, he learns to deal with dangerous animals, fight, and get out of dangerous situations. He grows physically stronger and learns to thrive on the island. There are effectively 3 types of people on the island: those that keep a level head and work together to survive, fodder who get themselves killed by letting the emotions get the better of them, and those who are let out of their cages and basically turn evil and use barbarism to stay in power. The story of Akira's group as a whole reminds me of something like in The Walking Dead. The conflict resolves around survival and a fictional enemy that the survivors learn how to fight, and also having to negotiate or be in direct conflict with other humans. They eventually build a permanent home base, but it gets destroyed, and after going through the cycle, the story becomes repetitive. It loses popularity, fizzles out in the end. This is seemingly a symptom of any survival drama. If the characters do the logical thing, become stronger, overcome previous obstacles and learn to survive, and ultimately start rebuilding civilization, the story becomes dull. And to revert to a survival story, the writers make illogical choices for the characters to destroy what was achieved in the first place and have them start all over again. But Cage of Eden had an end goal set from the beginning of the story: uncover the mysteries of the island and return home. Whenever a story arc ends, you can just move the characters closer to that goal and have a satisfying ending waiting just around the corner. This is ultimately where the Cage of Eden continues to follow in Walking Dead's footsteps. The manga was never that popular, and by the time it did last long enough, it seemed like it was leading up to a final story arc. The whole thing was ended in the span of a single volume. In a handful of chapters, it went from a heightened point of anticipation to complete confusion and disappointment. The ending of the manga relies on exposition dumps from perspectives that's not even from the characters that we've been watching this entire time for the entirety of the 20 volumes leading up point. And the explanation for everything was pretty intriguing, but it took the wind out of the sails of all the anticipation that was coming because it ended so quickly. I don't want to spoil the details of the ending, but it doesn't even go out of its way to clarify whether its explanation for the airplane crash was either time travel, a wormhole, or it was all a dream from a certain other character's perspective that weren't even aware of until the final chapters. If the final elements of the ending could have been hinted out a little earlier on, or had more time to be fleshed out and explained without being dumped in exposition, the elements of the ending could be used to actually make a really intriguing story. Cage of Eden is so close to being a great success. I really felt excited every time a new volume was released, and it was the last time I was recently able to consistently read a story as it was being released time and time again. The story was consistent the whole way up to the final volume, and I still recommend checking it out because of what it does right.